the crowd that he attracts, because he attracts a different crowd than we usually have. Well, this year, he got sick. So that he was sick with the flu or COVID when he was supposed to talk. So we really didn't want him talking to us. COVID, and so we got on the phone. He must have called me, but he was still in his sick bed about 3 days later. When can we do it? So we had to schedule around Lincoln's birthday. The only person in the world that you have to schedule around Lincoln's birthday because he's busy then. And then, so we had settled on March 1st. Then I looked at the weather and it was supposed to snow. And I said, oh dear, what, should we do it, should we not? I said, well, it looks like it's only gonna stick on the grass and not on the streets, let's do it. And this morning I get a call from Virginia that the judge is not well today. He went to the emergency room this morning and they have sent him home, but there's gonna need some attention. So he's ailing again today. Fear not, I am not gonna do the program. But I am gonna tell you about some of the things that are coming up. There's a couple of hearth cooking experiences on our schedule on February 21st and March 14th. There are a couple of openings. You have to sign up ahead of time. It's a fundraiser for the museum. It's $100 a person. It raises some money to pay the plowman, you know. And Ellen Madison hosts that at her house, and you get to work in a colonial fireplace kitchen and make your own supper. So it's a nice evening. Next Sunday, if you want to learn more about the Colonial Kitchen, Maureen Borkland will be presenting a program about the kitchen in colonial times. And later on in March, we will have a program on the music of early America. So it's a wide variety of things, somehow related to 250 years ago here in what is now the United States. But the judge always has a backup plan. And he has been working with his goddaughter and niece, is it?
Grandniece.
Both the same, okay. And Leah Williams, and I will let her fiance tell you all about it.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, I guess, now. I didn't know I was doing an introduction today, but I guess I can be the one to talk about my fiance, who's very wonderful, and I'm going to be talking with you today. Leah graduated from Roger Williams University in 2021, magna cum laude. She graduated from Roger Williams Law School in 2025, magna cum laude. She was a managing editor of the Law Review, where she wrote about literacy education and gaining access to literacy for people who have been underprivileged in their dyslexia diagnoses. She's an excellent advocate and has worked with the Supreme Court Justice Maureen McKenna Goldberg. She currently works at the Rhode Island Superior Court in Providence. Just an excellent legal mind and a young and bright attorney who I'm so happy to share life with, but also today to share with all of you. So that is my absolute honor to present to you the Chief's niece, and an excellent, excellent speaker here today, Leah Williams.
Thank you, Austin, for that very kind introduction. So, as you all know, unfortunately, the chief was not able to make it today. So he asked me to speak in his place. So, although I am still his niece, I am not the chief, but I hope that I can still do him justice. Independence is fickle and delicate, and it can very quickly vanish when we entrust a small group of powerful leaders to have a hand in every decision our government makes across a vast array of institutions. One branch that has always been a bedrock of this independence, especially in Rhode Island, has been our judiciary. The judiciary has consistently served as a foundation of independence, upholding and interpreting the law reliably, and remaining steadfast on key principles like religious freedom. However, these principles and qualities that define our judiciary did not just create themselves. Great leaders and jurists have forged this legacy with one of its most prominent figures, Joshua Babcock. Joshua was born here in Westerly in 1707. He was the son of Captain James Babcock, who was one of the first permanent settlers of Westerly. At the age of 17, Joshua Babcock became the first Rhode Islander to graduate from Yale College, where he earned a Bachelor of Arts degree before leaving to study medicine in Boston and London. Upon his return to Westerly, Babcock bought the mansion in which we stand. Within these walls, Babcock practiced medicine as a physician and surgeon for 25 years. He ran the largest general retail store between New York and Boston and became involved in politics. Babcock would eventually serve as the deputy to the General Assembly of Rhode Island, where he represented Westerly for many years. He was also a member of the Board of Fellows at Brown University, where he was one of the first incorporators. And he was appointed the first colonial postmaster of Westerly, with the post office located here in this house. The Rhode Island Supreme Court, once referred to as the Supreme Judicial Court, was founded in 1747. That same year, Joshua Babcock served as an associate justice. He then became the second Chief Justice 2 years later, where he served for another 4 years. In colonial Rhode Island, courts were central to everyday life. They handled disputes over land, debt, contracts, inheritance, and crime. Judges like Babcock were expected to balance English legal traditions with local custom and fairness, which was not an easy feat, but was one that Babcock and the colonial judiciary here took on. Here in Rhode Island, we did not outright reject the English common law. Instead, Joshua Babcock and other jurists at the time applied the English common law to everyday situations and felt the pulse of those in the community, which over time was shaped and molded into our modern laws. In fact, those English statutes received as part of the colony's common law, pursuant to the Act of 1767 and later endorsed by the General Assembly's Act of 1798, continue in effect to this day, subject only to legislative changes over the ensuing centuries. In addition to his contribution to the courts, Joshua Babcock was an important figure during the American Revolution. He was an ardent patriot and supported the independence of the colonies, as did most Rhode Islanders at the time. In the 1700s, Rhode Island's economy depended almost entirely on trade. As a colony of the British Empire, Rhode Island's trade industry was controlled by the British government, who dictated who they could trade with and what they could trade. Although Britain could make strict laws about Rhode Island's trade, it often chose not to enforce those laws due to the practical difficulties in communication and enforcement. However, after an expensive war with France, Britain sought to pay off its debts by enforcing stricter taxes on the trade of molasses and rum in Rhode Island. Because they could no longer avoid taxes, Rhode Islanders spent much of the 1760s in protest against the Stamp Act, the Townshend Act, and other laws affecting the economic relationship between Rhode Island and Great Britain. Groups of angry colonists burned and fired cannons upon British ships, including the HMS St. John and the HMS Liberty. On June 10, 1772, the HMS Gaspee, an imperial ship known for destroying fishing vessels, seizing cargo, and flagging down ships to harass and interrogate the colonials, was destroyed by a group of Rhode Islanders. The burning of the Gaspee became known as the first blood in the Revolution, as this event has been recognized by historians as the essential catalyst that launched the American Revolution. After a long period of violence, Rhode Island is the first colony to declare its independence from Britain. About 2 months prior to the Declaration's signing in 1776, the General Assembly declared Rhode Island's independence by ending allegiance to the king and establishing their own government. In fact, the Declaration of Independence was read from the stairs of the old Colony House in Newport, which still stands to this day. In addition to Rhode Island's prominent role in American Revolutionary history, Joshua Babcock also played a prominent role in these historical events that made our early nation and state. At the time of the Gaspee burning, he served as a member of that assembly and was a major general in the state militia. He was also a member of the Rhode Island War Council, procured equipment for Westerly's troops, and served as paymaster. Babcock also had connections to important figures in colonial history. He eventually became acquainted with Benjamin Franklin, who stayed here on Granite Street during his various journeys to New England. For years, the two wrote letters to each other about their shared political interests, and Franklin often mentioned Babcock's wife and sons, whom he had grown fond of. When Joshua Babcock died in 1783, and for many years after, there were no separation of powers. A life without separation of powers was dangerous, and power was concentrated in the hands of a few, as the same individuals often served as legislators, judges, and military leaders. Although this structure allowed colonial governments to act swiftly, it was also risky. Without separation of powers, fairness depended not on institutional safeguards, but on the character, restraint, and conscience of those entrusted with authority, men like Joshua Babcock. Since then, we have evolved as both a nation and a culture. From that evolution came a deeper understanding that justice must be grounded in balance, accountability, and a shared commitment to peace. The development of separation of powers, checks and balances, and an independent judiciary reflects a collective hope that disputes would be resolved through law rather than violence. Fairness in law has also long depended on something quieter than trials and verdicts: mediation. In colonial Rhode Island, many disputes never reached a formal courtroom. Neighbors, judges, and community leaders often encourage compromise, reconciliation, and dialogue as a means of preserving peace. Mediation reflected the belief that justice was not only about declaring a winner and a loser, but about restoring balance and preventing future violence. This emphasis on resolution over retaliation reinforced the idea that law should heal divisions rather than deepen them. Rhode Island's own history, marked by resistance, protest, and conflict, points toward the belief that fairness is strongest when it restrains power and protects human dignity. This belief is captured in our state's enduring motto, hope. Hope that law can temper anger. Hope that fairness can prevail over force. Hope that progress is possible even after periods of unrest. Hope is not passive. It is an active commitment to fairness, to nonviolence, and to the belief that justice can be improved. In Rhode Island, hope has always meant trusting that principled leadership and community judgment can guide society forward, even in uncertain times. Joshua Babcock's life reminds us that hope, paired with fairness, can shape institutions that endure far beyond a single generation. Standing here today in the Babcock-Smith house, we are reminded that history is not only made in grand halls or famous battles. It is made in homes, in courtrooms, and in everyday decisions about fairness and responsibility. Joshua Babcock's life illustrates how law in colonial Rhode Island was deeply personal. Judges were neighbors, laws were debated in town meetings. Justice was something people expected to see carried out by those they knew and trusted. This house, then, is not just a residence. It is a symbol of a legal culture that valued independence, conscience, and institutional trust. Now, Joshua Babcock did not leave behind a single famous ruling or a landmark legal text. His legacy is more subtle and perhaps more enduring. He represents a generation of colonial leaders who believed that law should serve liberty, not suppress it, that justice must be rooted in local values, and that authority must be accountable to the people it governs. Rhode Island's contribution to American law lies not in rigid systems, but in bold ideas, religious freedom, and resistance to unjust authority. As we reflect on Joshua Babcock and the colonial judiciary, we are reminded that the rule of law is not static. It is shaped by the courage of those willing to interpret it wisely, and when necessary, to challenge it. Walter Isaacson writes in his book, The Greatest Sentences Ever Written, about the enduring promise of the Declaration of Independence's assertion of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That sentence frames justice not as control, but as possibility. It reflects the same hopeful vision that guided Rhode Island's early legal culture, a belief that law should safeguard life, preserve liberty, and create the conditions in which people may pursue fulfillment in peace. It is a vision rooted not in force, but in fairness, restraint, and hope. I want to thank you all for your attention and your curiosity. I want to thank the Chief for this opportunity to be with all of you, and of course the Babcock-Smith House for having me. This is an extraordinary place that allows us to not only to remember history, but to stand within it and keep it alive. Thank you.
Are there questions that you would like to ask? Oh, good. Just-
I can try. I just clearly don't have the same expertise as the Chief, but.
Leah, this is Colonial Court, so this predates the constitutional protections against things like cruel and unusual punishment. Can you speak at all to what some of the common offenses were, what the common penalties might have been in colonial times?
I think they were much more severe than just jail. I mean, I don't know exactly what they were specifically, but I know that there were, there could be hangings, there could be, all sorts of more violent penalties rather than just regular incarceration as we have today. I don't know exactly what those specifically were. I just know that they were more violent.
If I were to be walking through Westerly in 1750, would I see somebody in the stocks and things like that?
Most likely, yes.
There was also a whipping post in town, right in front of what it was used to be Friendly's restaurant.
So, in your training to be an attorney or to work with the courts, how much reliance on history do you think, in looking back on your preparation in that, in your schooling, and how much discussion on a day-to-day basis of the roots of history within the judiciary do you find?
Right, so we, in our law school training, focus mainly on the case law and the history behind the case law. It's very rare that we discuss history like Joshua Babcock and his life and the upbringing of the judiciary. It's mainly based on case law, and it's based on how the legal principles that we have today were established and where they came from. It's definitely helpful to have a background in history going into law school. It provides a lot of context for the cases that we are reading, but not within law school specifically. There's not a heavy emphasis on the actual events of history, and more so on what the law was and how it evolved over time.
Okay, thank you.
You had mentioned that a lot of the law may have been centered around trade because of Rhode Island. Unfortunately, one of the biggest trading opportunities in Newport back then was around slaves. Were there any disputes? Were there any major law cases involving abolitionists versus pro-slave?
Right. So I'm sure there were disputes. I don't know of any specific case law. The legal education doesn't go back that far. We tend to deal with more of the recent case of Plessy versus Ferguson, and we deal with more Brown versus Board of Education, the more recent cases that help frame our legal history and our law today. So I have not read personally those earlier cases back from that period of time. I know there definitely have been disputes. I think it's part of the course that there were disputes over it. I just don't know particularly what those cases are and what they say.
You mentioned separation of powers. It seems like today we really rely on the separation of powers a lot.
Yes.
Would you agree?
I think that's the idea. That's the idea, is to rely on the separation of powers as much as we can. Whether or not that, actually comes to fruition is another thing. I think that's the idea behind it, is to make sure that, every branch is doing their own thing, and we have the checks and balances to make sure that power isn't all in one area. So definitely is an important concept.
Which is favorite.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You did